Welcome to Marketplace Live. Let's defy gravity.
Hey everyone. On behalf of the Women's Tech Forum, I'd like to offer a very warm welcome and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Sarah McComb, and I am proud to be one of the founding members and current president of WTF. By the way of a quick background, the Women's Tech Forum is an industry networking group founded in early 2017 to help connect the women who are building the cloud and powering the internet. We are delighted to be a part of Marketplace Live and wanted to thank the Digital Realty's Women's Leadership Forum, who is sponsoring today's session. Today, we are delighted to bring you a masterclass on defying echo chambers and the power of belonging with our guest speaker, Dr. Anita Sands. The power of technology's limitless influence and reach is too great for it to rest in the hands of the few when it impacts the lives of all. Unless women and other underrepresented groups assert their presence, the tech industry will become an echo chamber, echoing the voices of some and amplifying the absence of others. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Anita, Dr. Anita Sands, a bit recently, and let me just say we are incredibly fortunate to have her here today. How often do you get to hear from an experienced board director who has a PhD in atomic and molecular physics and hails from a place called Termafeckin, Ireland? After her PhD, she came to the United States as a Fulbright scholar for her master's in public policy and management. She then spent 10 years in financial services, specializing in enterprise transformation and technology-led innovation. Recognizing the growing influence of technology, she made a major shift and moved to Silicon Valley. She now serves on the board of directors for 5 technology companies. As if that isn't enough, she is also a regular contributor to Forbes.com, where she writes about leadership and strategy, and is a visiting professor of female entrepreneurship at Princeton University. She is a world-renowned commentator on digital transformation and leadership in the digital age, and advises organizations how to perform and succeed in conditions of uncertainty and continuous disruption. Anita, we are honored to have you with us today. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and to all of your friends at the Women's Tech Forum for having me here today. I am really honored to be participating in Marketplace Live. I had the good fortune to get to know some of the folks at Digital Realty not so long ago who I know are helping to sponsor this session, so I'm honored to be here with you all. Today I'm going to talk about the power of belonging. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of diversity for our industry, and I'm going to start by explaining why, as a board director of somebody who sits on the board of 3 or 4 tech companies, why I feel so passionately about this topic and about its importance at this point in time. There is no question that 2020 has brought about a lot of unprecedented changes. And the one thing we know about times of change is that change happens faster in times of change. Our industry was already undergoing seismic shifts, whether they were just technological advances, demographic changes. But this year, we've seen a huge acceleration in some of those trends, whether it's more people moving to hybrid, multi-cloud, poly-cloud environments, the acceleration of digital transformation, you name it. Therefore, it behooves all of us in this industry to think about the sources of competitive advantage that we can draw on as things continue to evolve and change at this rapid pace. And diversity of thought, diversity of perspectives is one of the greatest sources of competitive advantage and a real strategic asset that we can all leverage. Diversity is also particularly important in times of adversity, which we've all dealt with this year as well. And to use an analogy from the battlefield, if you're on a battlefield, there's very little value in having everybody on your team look at the problem through the same set of binoculars. You want to have an array of perspectives, opinions, viewpoints, inputs, and then you want to put those inputs together in order to give you a strategic awareness, a strategic thought pattern as to what is going on and be able to leverage that to the advantage of your organization. So as a board director in tech, I'm an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and belonging, not because I think it's a nice thing to do, or not even because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm a supporter of diversity, inclusion, and belonging because I see it as a crucial component in creating and maintaining shareholder value. In fact, I think when you look around boardrooms, you look around organizations at the kinds of challenges that we have encountered this year and that we will no doubt encounter in the future, I really think as a director, it's a dereliction of my duties to shareholders if I don't advocate for having as much diversity in our industry as possible. The other reason why diversity is particularly important in tech is that we all know the reach, the power, and the influence that this industry has and is going to continue to have. And quite frankly, it is a power too great to rest in the hands of a few when it impacts the lives of all. The technology industry has become more powerful, but it's not yet all good. We have come a long way in terms of improving diversity in our industry, but just because we've traveled a little bit further than where we were does not mean that we are anywhere close to equality or anywhere close to having an industry that reflects the talents, the ideas, the creativity of a broad spectrum of our population. And as we all know, when we are missing a spectrum, a piece of the spectrum in terms of talent, well, then we're also missing a piece of the innovation spectrum. Because if everybody around the table went to the same schools, worked for kind of the same companies throughout the course of their careers, holds the same worldview, shares the same opinion, they will inevitably reach the same limited conclusions. And therefore, we need diversity. We have to avoid ending up in echo chambers because given the work that we do in creating technologies, infrastructure, platforms, applications, we're not just building tools. We are laying the foundation upon which humanity as a digital species will exist. That's the mission that we're on in our industry. And therefore, if we create echo chambers, we will just, echo and amplify the voices of some, but we will also amplify the absence of others and do so at an industrial scale. So I want to talk a little bit today about belonging and why I put my personal emphasis on the power of belonging as opposed to just talking about diversity and inclusion. And the reason I do that is I have several reasons. The first is that diversity in some ways is just a fact. The numbers are what the numbers are. Inclusion is a choice. You can choose to include people or not. But belonging is a feeling. And it's a feeling that every single human being can relate to. As I like to say, you can be a white man sitting around a table full of white men and not feel that you belong. And that can be for a broad range of reasons. Every single one of you listening to me right now can think of a moment in your life when you felt you didn't belong. Maybe you were bullied at school. Maybe you're gay and struggle to come out. Maybe you were embarrassed by your parents' situation. Maybe you have a child with special needs. Whatever your circumstances might be, every one of us can relate back to that feeling in the pit of our stomachs when we felt that we didn't belong. Now, when you look around the table virtually at your colleagues these days, think about the pain that is in somebody's heart if every day they have to experience that feeling in the pit of their stomachs simply to make a living and to provide for their family. That is the power of belonging. The other reason I talk about belonging is that I think when we sort of emphasize the word diversity, we very quickly narrow the aperture as to how we think about diversity or what we define it to be. And we end up very quickly talking about things like gender or things like race. But as all of us know, there are so many variables that go into making up who we are. There are so many things that shape our worldview and the perspective that we bring to the table. All of the things that make us different on the inside, if you will, not what makes us different on the outside. There are so many elements of diversity that we don't pay enough attention to. Age, for example, being one of them. 91% of people have felt that they've experienced some form of age discomfort or discrimination at a point in their careers. You're either too old for something, you're too young for something. And yet only 6 to 8% of diversity strategies in companies include age as a consideration. Another major factor in shaping how we look at the world is the circumstances in which we grew up. All of you know, if you grow up with a life of privilege, you do have a worldview. You do look at the world through a certain lens. If you grow up with a life without privilege, where you've really struggled to get to where you are, it does shape how you think. It shapes your values. It shapes your perspective. These are all elements of diversity that help us together put together a much broader picture, a much more comprehensive view of the landscape, the challenges, the opportunities that confront us every day at work. And that's what you're trying to harness, is the power of that cognitive diversity. The other thing that is important about belonging is to sort of understand what it's not. Belonging is not the same as being included. Like I said, you could be included in a room, you could be included on a board, but if you don't feel like you belong, you're going to play small, you're going to act small, you're going to be reluctant to speak up. So even though let's just take, for example, my world of boards, even though we may recruit diverse people to a boardroom, if they don't feel like they actually belong and they don't speak up, well, then we don't get the benefit of having that diversity around the table in the first place. So one way to think about it is diversity is like a seed and inclusion is perhaps the crop, but belonging, therefore, is how you harvest it. It's how you get the benefit of all your diversity and inclusion efforts to begin with. So belonging to me, very simply, is when I feel that I can bring my full authentic self to work every day. When there's not this big delta between who I am on a Sunday afternoon with my friends and family and who I am with my colleagues on a Monday. And when you don't feel that you belong, you mask or cover. And a study by Deloitte several years ago found that over 2/3 of people mask or cover on at least one dimension every day at work. So when you feel that there's a price to your ticket at the door, when you have to check a part of your life or a part of your personality or a part of your story at the door, you will never bring your full capabilities to bear on your work. If you are leaving a fraction of yourself at home in order to fit in with the dominant culture, then you are only going to be able to unleash a fraction of your capability. When I study elite teams like military special forces, I've looked at the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team. The one thing that you learn from military special forces is that they purposefully design for diversity, not because it's a nice thing to do or the right thing to do, but they see it as a vital necessity. And in fact, when they're under pressure and when they're literally coming under enemy fire, they really want everybody's diverse perspective to be amplified so that they can find the best solution to their problem. However, they know that there's a tremendous downside and a tremendous potential risk if somebody on their team is trying to fold themselves like a pretzel to fit in. Because a moment of hesitation here or a second of doubt or reluctance over there could be the difference between literally life or limb for some of these teams. So when you look at elite performing teams, I expected that diversity would play a role, but what I didn't expect was to hear that they consider belonging to be the singular biggest predictor of their success. Belonging is what gives people psychological safety, to feel that they're safe to speak up. And if their idea gets shot down, it's not because of anything to do with them, or they also feel psychologically free, so that they're not coming to work every day feeling like they have to prove and reprove themselves. They're psychologically free, psychologically safe to do their best, to bring their best, and to be their best. So let's unpack belonging a little bit and its component parts from the study that I've done this year of these elite teams. Belonging in their world comprises of 3 different factors: cultural belonging, functional belonging, and enabling belonging. And cultural belonging, if we start there, is probably what we would recognize in the corporate world as being the closest to kind of diversity and inclusion type of speak. But it has a few unique nuances in these elite teams that we perhaps don't think of in the corporate world. First of all, cultural belonging only happens when people feel full acceptance. So it's not enough just to have a diverse opinion or to bring that diverse opinion to the team. You have to feel fully accepted in order to be willing to share that diverse perspective and that unique vantage point. The second thing is that cultural belonging is predicated on an environment of trust, a mantra that they refer to as trust and be trusted. In other words, the members of these teams know that they are trusted and they are relied upon and they are valuable members of the team, but equally they feel that they can place their trust in their team members and in their environment. And that is what sort of the combination of acceptance and trust together really takes this sort of, allows cultural belonging to take hold. Once you have cultural belonging in place, you operationalize it at a team level and an organizational level through functional belonging. And functional belonging also has two component parts. The first part of functional belonging is having clarity of purpose. In fact, having utmost clarity of purpose. In other words, these teams, whether it's the All Blacks or whether it's military special forces, they know why it is that they belong together. And they know the purpose that they serve as one. There's no doubt in anybody's mind about the alignment between their sort of vision of self and their sense of purpose with the purpose of the organization. The second thing that fits under functional belonging is what they call having a shared frame of reference. Think of this as like a spine of beliefs. Think of this as values in action. In other words, they know how they're going to go about this why thing. So they know why it is that they belong together as a unit and as a team, and they know how they're going to go about performing and exceeding expectations. We see this in other contexts as well. For example, you see it in Formula One pit crews, where they literally go into this incredibly synchronized, orchestrated set of actions, all within, less than 3 seconds for an average pit stop. You see it in operating theaters if a patient is coding. What you don't see there is people panicking and looking around, wondering what is anybody else going to do or if they're going to do their jobs. Everybody knows what each other is going to do, and everybody knows that the other has their best interests at heart and has their back. And that is what allows the capabilities of the full team to be operationalized and unleashed. And it's what gets you into this place where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts from a performance and a productivity and an execution standpoint. And then the third element of belonging is what they call enabling belonging. And this is almost like the holy grail, because the one thing we know about top talent is that top talent can be innately restless. So therefore, wherever they are, they need to believe and they need to feel that this is the place where I can be my best. This is where I know that I am part of something bigger than just myself, and I am stronger and better here than I would be if I'm on my own. Enabling belonging is when you get to a point where you feel almost a duty or a responsibility to belong and make better. In other words, if you talk to teams like the All Blacks, they'll use expressions like, we need to leave the jersey in a better place than where we found it. They have rituals where they actually have these empty jerseys just to sort of manifest in somebody's mind the sense that you get to occupy this jersey for a short period of time. And when you're in that jersey and you're that number, you need to be the best number 11 or whatever it might be that in the history of the All Blacks. But then you will move on, the jersey shall remain. And you need to be what they call a good ancestor and leave the jersey and leave the legacy that you've been entrusted with in a better place than how you found it. So belonging in this respect is not a convenient partnership. It's not what can my company do for me. It's what can I do for my company? What can I do for the purpose that I'm fully aligned with, that I'm all feeling all engulfed by? And how can I leave my team and my organization in a better place than when I found it? So you can see that when you talk about belonging in that type of a context, it's immediately obvious how it is linked to high performance. And it's not just a warm and fuzzy kind of HR concept. This is how these teams get to a place where they not only can endure conditions of stress and ambiguity and uncertainty, and they not only perform in conditions like that, but they actually have the fullest of expectation that they are going to thrive and exceed expectations in these types of conditions. Belonging in elite teams like these is almost like what gravity is to an astronaut. If you don't have it, you'll simply break apart and drift away. And that's why I'd like to spend just a couple of moments talking about why belonging is particularly critical in years like this and in times like this that, like we're encountering today in business. The interesting thing about a crisis is that a crisis takes you as it finds you. A crisis doesn't knock on your door and say, oh, hi, Anita, I'm here to mess up your entire year. Will you get yourself organized, get yourself ready, get settled down, get comfortable, and then we'll head into crisis mode. Crisis just takes us as it finds us. And every one of us was in a different spot in March when the crisis started to unfold, and we are now in a different spot as a result. Crises are also notorious for surfacing inequalities in our lives and in our experiences. And what we're starting to see this year, we're starting to see some of the data emerge, including the most recent Women in the Workplace report by McKinsey and Lean In, is that the crisis and the pressures of this year has had a disproportionate effect on women, and particularly on working mothers. And it has also had a disproportionate effect on Black employees, and particularly Black working moms as well. What you see happening is that all of the pressures and all of the interruptions and all of the sort of the pull of everything else that's surfaced in our life this year, all of that sort of brings this sort of existential question to the top of everybody's mind, which is, when I think about what I do for a living and I think about where I was working or where I am working, what's holding me here? This crisis has surfaced all this other stuff in my life that is really important. I need to take care of my kids. I need to take care of my parents. So what's holding me here? Is the pull of belonging that I feel to my team and to my organization strong enough to offset the pull and the demand of these interferences and these priorities that the crisis has surfaced? So the bond of belonging on offer to your employees right now has to be strong enough to offset these other factors that are pulling them in a different direction. And that's why belonging in a crisis has to capture every one of our employees with a level of depth and intensity that's different than what we might need in peace times. So there are some of the reasons why I feel that belonging is particularly important. But I would also like just to touch on why it's difficult and why we have struggled in our industry to move the dial further, to move the dial fast enough when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. The first thing I want to say is that we need to give diversity, or DIBS, its due. This stuff is not easy. If it were easy, everybody would do it, and everybody would do it overnight. The fact is that diverse teams take longer to recruit. The fact is that diverse teams are harder to manage because it may take longer, be more difficult to reach consensus, and you may have tensions between these differing perspectives. We also know that diverse teams, almost by definition, require a level of effort on behalf of the organization at all levels to achieve diversity, I should say. But one of the mistakes we often make is we create echo chambers in how we go about pursuing these diversity initiatives. I've been speaking on this topic for many years, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone to speak to a Women in Tech event only to find myself speaking to a room full of women. And let's face it, in many respects, that's the kind of the converted preaching to themselves, right? So too often inside organizations, we almost put the onus or the burden to advance these diversity objectives on the underrepresented group in question. So you're now saying to women, in this instance, not only do I need you to show up for yourself and be your own voice, but I also need you to be the voice for this whole other organization that I want to get to a more diverse place. So we think we create echo chambers sometimes in how we go about our diversity initiatives. The other thing I think we need to do a better job of is to understand the vital role that men play in achieving a more diverse and inclusive workforce. It is simply not okay to make white, straight men feel that they're the problem. It is simply not okay to make white, straight men, or any other group for that matter, somehow feel an element of shame that we are where we are. You can't shame somebody into being a better version of themselves. In fact, all you'll do is convince them that they're not able to be a better version of themselves. The vast majority of men are incredibly supportive about the advancement of women and the greater participation of women in our industry. But also, the vast majority don't know what they can do about it. They need a clear pathway to be part of the solution. And it's incredibly important that we bring them into the dialogue and that we co-create the answers together. It's not going to work in the long run if we simply replace if we equalize unfairness. We can't simply replace one set of unfair norms and practices with another set of unfair norms and practices. So these agendas, these objectives, these initiatives, these movements, they have to be ones where we call people in, not call people out. And then the last thing I will say about diversity is, and diversity efforts, is that they are highly contextual, right? Every organization is starting off from a different place, and every organization will have a different and hopefully realistic definition of success. The success of these types of initiatives very much depends on culture and on values, right? This relates back to what I was talking about when I talked about functional belonging, your values in action. And nothing undermines your progress or your success or your probability of success in pursuing a more diverse and inclusive workforce than having hollow values on a wall somewhere, on having a big diversity and inclusion initiative, come up with your organizational values, print them out, educate everybody about them, make these very great press releases and announcements, and then behave in a way that is different to what the words say. If you create a condition or an environment where your values are said to be one thing, but they live as something else, every time you allow that to happen, all you are doing is putting a little crack and another little crack and another little crack in the foundation of your company that you're trying to build upon. So we need to have sort of two things to be particularly mindful of when it comes to approaching diversity initiatives. The first is there needs to be zero tolerance for certain things. Now, I'm not telling you what those certain things should be. That's up to your organization and your corporate values and your organization's policies to determine. But once there's zero tolerance around those things, there needs to be zero tolerance around those things. Nobody has tolerance for a CEO who plays loose and fast with accounting rules. So we shouldn't have any tolerance for whether it's a CEO or anybody else playing loose and fast with some of our values and some of our other policies. If you allow certain teams to interpret the rules for themselves, if you make exceptions for somebody's behavior over there because he or she is a rainmaker and therefore you're willing to turn a blind eye, nothing will alienate and demoralize and basically kill your initiative before it even gets out of the gate than that. I recall interviewing somebody who worked for a large financial services firm back when I was in that industry. And she told me that her firm had just gone through a really robust exercise of coming up with new corporate values sort of under the new CEO. And the week after they announced these values that were all about the things you would expect, integrity and honesty and that type of thing, they announced the hire of two senior business leaders, both of whom had incredibly bad reputations across the industry for some of the things that you would not consider to be high integrity or related to honesty or good character. So the employees in my friend's firm simply looked up and they said, "You've got to be kidding me. These are allegedly our values." And then the CEO literally the next week goes and hires two guys in this case who are known for being violators of exactly those types of values. That kind of message is just going to kill any good intent or any goodwill towards this type of initiative before it even gets out of the gate. So what I'll do there is perhaps I will pause and before I hand it back to Sarah and just encourage you to think about what you can do to create a culture and an environment where people feel that they genuinely belong. Now, I will say, however, that bringing your authentic self to work is not a case where it should be a free-for-all, where anybody can say anything or be themselves sort of in an unconstrained, unbounded way. Being an authentic leader, in my definition, is being yourself, skillfully. All of us should have sort of a slight bandwidth that is very authentic to who we are, but we should have enough self-awareness and enough situational awareness to know how to show up as the best version of yourself in that context. And that's an important nuance for when we're thinking about building up self-awareness and situational awareness and emotional intelligence across our teams. But what we're trying to strive for here are environments where people feel they belong, so they feel accepted and they feel trusted, they feel aligned with the purpose, and there's incredible clarity as to what that purpose is. They know what the spine of beliefs are in the company. They know how the values will look like in action. And then they know that this is a place where they feel a duty and a responsibility to make it even better for everybody else. And they know that this is a place where they can be themselves. And therefore, no matter what the pull of external circumstances or lives or anything or crises, they won't drift away or break apart from your organization because that belonging bond and that sense of organizational membership is delivering what each and every employee needs. Cultures of belonging are cultures where winning is defined by helping others the most. Winning is defined as lifting others as you climb. Winning is defined by enabling other people to do their best work, not just being sort of focused on your ability to do your best work. I also appreciate that going on these journeys are difficult. It's sometimes more difficult. You sort of stir the pot and you expect that things might get a little worse before they'll get better. Yeah, these journeys are messy and they're difficult because we are all perfectly imperfect humans, and therefore these will be perfectly imperfect journeys. But I think if one thing is worth getting into difficult and messy for, it's humanity. It's our shared future, and it's the shared future of an industry where the aperture is wider for a larger proportion of our population to participate, where the aperture is wider for our sons and daughters to have an equal chance to participate in and help shape the future of this amazing industry. And at the end of the day, we all want technology that is shaped by all humans and not stunted by our humanity. So thank you for listening. And Sarah, I shall hand it back to you in the studio, as they say, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sands. That was an incredibly inspiring talk to just hear. And I would love to dive into a couple of these, a couple of your topics with some more questions. So the big topic, of course, is that concept of belonging. And I would love to know, whose responsibility is it to create the sense of belonging? Is it just the manager? Is it the team members? Who should we look to?
Well, you know, Sarah, that's one of the reasons why I love talking about belonging as opposed to D&I, because I think when we talk a lot about D&I, you feel like these are major agendas and initiatives that are sort of pushed down from the top. Whereas the one thing I love about belonging is that everybody can help to make other people feel that they belong, right? So belonging and a great culture is built from the top, the middle, and the bottom of an organization. You can give somebody a moment of belonging by asking them what their story is. What's your story of origin? By having those little moments of intimacy that help to build trust. And the great thing about belonging is that anybody can do it, because all it requires is a willingness to be a little bit vulnerable and to share your story with somebody else as well. So as the All Blacks like to say, vulnerable is the new strong. It's the root of all courage. So managers can create, even within their teams, an incredible sense of belonging by being willing to be vulnerable, by talking about, say in the case of this year, the challenges that they've felt themselves as a human being, by asking people how are they doing, and by being willing to talk openly about their mistakes. So not only can they learn from them, but everybody can learn from them. So I really love this idea of belonging because it is something that everybody can help contribute to.
Can you create a sense of belonging without sharing everything about your personal life, your beliefs, your political views? I mean, some of those can become quite difficult to talk about for people, or people are introverts versus extroverts, or sort of where are their lines? Where should the lines be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one I'm getting asked, as you might imagine, quite a lot in these particular times. What do I do if I feel I can't talk about my political beliefs to my manager, right? And look, the answer is, in all of these things, the right answer and the right approach is highly contextual, right? Because what is acceptable in one culture in an organization is perhaps not accepted in another, right? But at the end of the day, like I said, being yourself authentically is about being yourself, skillfully. The belonging that I'm talking about is a belonging to a sense of purpose and to a sense of mission and to a sense of supporting the team's overall goals and supporting your overall success. It doesn't necessarily strike me that we need to talk about our religious beliefs or our political views in order to fulfill the purpose and the mission of the team. And I really feel at the end of the day, at best, what we need to be mindful of is the importance of respect for other people's opinions and the importance of remaining curious about what sits in the mind of another human being and why. Everybody genuinely, I think the best thing you can do, Sarah, is to go into these conversations with the understanding that everyone's intent is good, that everybody's entitled to their opinion, that it's interesting to know how other people think and what they think. But I don't think it necessarily means that we have to have fully fledged conversations about religion or politics or whatever in order for us to be a great team. I'd much rather we focus on, as human beings, what does it take for each of us to feel like today was our best day at work, and that best day was enabled by those that were around us, that they provided support to us. So I think the important thing is, pay attention to the policies of your organization, be self-aware and situationally aware of what's appropriate, be respectful of another person's opinion, but I think most of all, be yourself, skillfully.
Okay, great. So you mentioned echo chambers, and, as a woman in this industry, there are not that many of us, and it does feel like you live in an echo chamber. And it's interesting because, as WTF, one of the things that, like us or hate us, that for pre-COVID times, our events were all women, and we were very strict about that. And there were people that really loved that idea, and there were people that really hated it. I can see the benefits both ways. So is an echo chamber, is it ever a good thing?
Well, I think depends on how you define echo chamber, right? There is tremendous benefit to, let's just use your example, to having an event that is sort of specially designed to meet the needs of women. Because quite often when you're in an industry where there are so few of you, and you're perhaps the only woman on your team, the only woman in your division, the only woman on your floor, the experience of onlys is actually quite well researched and quite well documented. And women who are onlys can often feel that they experience these sort of tiny microaggressions all the time. Now, again, I really genuinely believe, and this is born out of my own experience too, that the vast majority of people, men and women, don't set out with the intent to being offensive to anybody. But it's just, it's incredible kind of how culture and context shapes our behaviors. So there's phenomenal research actually done by a professor at Stanford where they did a psychology professor, and they got people to play a game of prisoners and wardens. And it actually was quite incredible to see how people's behavior changed when they took on these assumed roles of I'm the warden, you're the prisoner, right? Another great psychology experiment done where it was proven that human beings are willing to actually inflict incredible pain on others if they feel they're being given instruction from above. So there was this incredible experiment where people thought they were administering electric shock to other people, but they were doing so on command from authority, right? So the important point of those two experiments is really just to show that context and culture can shape how we behave. So we need to be mindful of the context that we're in, and are we allowing things to happen that, you know, shouldn't be allowed to slide. So what I would encourage people to do is, yes, there are events where it's super helpful for women to share their experience with other women, to know that we're not alone in some of the experiences that we have, to be able to laugh about some of the things that we encounter, right? But if we really want to move the dial as an industry, this movement has got to include men, not just men as allies, but men as, I say, co-conspirators, right? They need to advocate for change as well, and they need to believe that there's a benefit to do so, because there simply aren't enough women in the industry in general, let alone in senior positions or positions of influence, to move the dial fast enough. So it's critical to think about who is not in the room, whose voice is not being reflected, and then to use your privilege, your power, your influence in order to change that for the better.
Yeah. You mentioned in your talk the McKinsey 2020 Women in the Workplace report has come out, and it's fascinating every year. And of course, a big impact on that was COVID this year. We are living in a time of increasing divide, from wage gaps to politics, and the impacts from COVID are only making things worse. People are seeing their routines, what balance they had, get thrown out the window. Of course, women are being hugely impacted by this, mothers especially. Some companies are giving more leeway to caretaker positions, which can leave those who aren't in those positions feeling like they have to take up the burden unfairly. How can people, whether a manager or not, foster a sense of belonging during these remote times when it's really easy to sort of fester that resentment? How do you get people that have different stressors and different impacts on their lives to come together?
Yeah. Let me just give you two viewpoints on that, Sarah. First of all, just relative to the divisiveness at the moment, I look at it as an incredible gift, something I'm incredibly grateful for. Not the divisiveness, the fact that we can be this divisive, but meaning that people can hold such strong opinions in this country and the democracy still works. Right? It's a wonderful litmus test for our democracy that everybody can feel so passionate and so engaged in the entire process, and it still works. So regardless of the outcome, I think it's a tremendous gift that this year has given us to show the level of engagement, to show how much people care about the future. And as they say, like, the future is going to be here soon enough, and we're all going to have to live in it together. So we will figure this out. Going back to women, the way I think managers can approach this is, a friend of mine worked for John Chambers at Cisco for many years, and she was raising a family and wanted to quit many times. And she would go into John's office and say, John, look, it's time. I really need to step back this time. And John's response was always, look, I look at you and this team as a baseball team. And sometimes you're up to bat, and there's other times when you need to be on the bench. And if you're telling me this is the time when you need to be on the bench, no problem. The rest of the team has your back. Because there'll be another time when you're able to be up for bat and somebody else will want to sit in the bench. So that's where I think, rather than fostering a culture of or allowing any form of resentment to emerge in these times, just to think of it that way, that look, right now is an opportunity for you to lean in, to show a colleague that you care, that you have their back, that you can, lend your strength the position you're in to them at this moment in time, and knowing that reciprocity being the greatest human value that it is, that will come back to you tenfold at some point in the future in your life. So I really believe, Sarah, in the innateness of goodness, and the innate goodness of people, and that most people have an attitude of, if I can lend you my strength at this moment in time when you need it, I will lean on yours at another point in time. The second thing, that just to touch on what managers can do, is it's like, as I was saying, crises are notorious for surfacing inequalities in people's lives. So it's important, if you pulled somebody out of a car wreck and they were beaten up really badly, the first thing you would say to them is, where does it hurt the most? Right? If you pull somebody out of a freezing ocean, the first thing you do is put a warm blanket around them. So what managers can do to support their employees right now is simply ask, like, where does it hurt the most? Or what's the pebble in your shoe that you've gone 7 months in this crisis kind of condition? If we need to go another 7 months, what are the things in your life that are starting, that little pebble in your shoe that's starting to rub your foot a little bit raw? But most importantly, as we head into the holidays, managers can really emphasize how not only valuable but vital it is to take rest, respite, recovery. When you study these elite teams, the All Black Special Forces, they are unapologetic about the need for rest and recovery, because they know that that is what allows them to be their best when their best is needed. They are also unapologetic about finding their equilibrium again. If you know you're off kilter, if you know that this is one of these days where you're feeling depleted, well, it's important to know that you're feeling depleted and that you're out of gas, because as all of us know, we can't run on an empty gas tank for very long. So recognizing what's going on in your life, what's going on in the life of your employees, replenishing them in whatever way is authentic for them, re-anchoring them around their equilibrium and re-anchoring them around the purpose of the company, but more importantly then, allowing people to take rest and respite. And the final point, perhaps, Sarah, I'll mention for managers is that my friend, who is a former Special Forces operative herself, she said, you can't expect people to run down a battlefield with folders on their heads filled with empty expectations. Right? So she really feels that in the corporate world, we're pretty sloppy about who we engage in what and for what reason and in what way. And this struck me just last week. I was on a board call, sort of an offline board call, and there were 16 people from the company on the call, in addition to the board members, and only 6 of them spoke. And I was thinking, what are the other 10 people doing on this call for 2 hours? It's probably not a good use of their time. So right now, as we head into the end of this year and start a new year, people are feeling depleted. People's energies are low. People are fatigued by it all. So as a manager, what you can do is be incredibly clear about what the real priorities are for your team, and just cut out the white noise, cut out any of the stuff that is unnecessary, because you need to be thoughtful about how you deploy your energy, your resources, and your time right now.
Okay, great. For the final sort of question I have for you, I want to talk a little bit about sort of belonging and what happens when people do leave. So, for example, senior level women are much more likely than senior level men to practice allyship in their companies, to help try to repair that broken rung in the ladder. But senior level women are burning out at a consistently higher rate than senior level men, across the board in practically anything you can think of. In the past few months, women have felt higher levels of exhaustion, burnout, and pressure to work more, that always on concept, than senior level men. And it's pushing women out. There's an expectation that we could lose upwards of 2 million women from the workforce over the next several months, year, what have you. And losing specifically senior level women, that has real tangible impact. It impacts the financial bottom line of the company, as well as a huge impact on culture. So I want to kind of talk about what happens if you lose these women. What does losing senior level women do to the sense of belonging that, everyone, but also specifically women, have at a corporation, whether they are in management or not? what do they experience? What do we experience, and what are the net effects of seeing senior level women leave?
Yeah, well, look, I think you've touched on a lot of them there, right? There's, aside from the research around how the performance of an organization is benefited from having diversity of many forms, gender being one, particularly at the top. And aside from the fact that you just mentioned, Sarah, the research around women tend to be more engaged in mentorship, allyship, sponsorship. They tend to drive more of the diversity and inclusion type agendas and organizations. So there's a lot of auxiliary benefits for having women in your company, but having diversity in general. The demoralizing effect of these women leaving, well, first of all, what's the message we're sending to the women, right? If we force this decision point on people, we're really saying to them, look, you have a problem here and you need to figure out how to solve it. It's not our problem to solve for you. And I think that's the wrong message to send. And clearly, the Women in the Workforce report is sounding a very serious alarm across female members of the workforce right now that we need to pay attention to. Yes, companies have, for example, instituted flexible work policies. But if those policies live different than they read, it's no good. So I remember I was talking to a senior investment banker. This was before COVID, and we were talking about flexible work policies, and she said, "Oh yeah, my company has those, but like if you leave early and to go to your kid's soccer game, whatever it might be, or concert recital, you feel like you have a bullseye on your back, and forget about leaving early during bonus season because that will be remembered." So there's no point in having flexible policies if they really don't offer flexibility, right? That's so important. The great thing that managers can do is demonstrate themselves that they are willing to take advantage of these flexible policies as well. I love the uptick we've seen in men taking paternity leave. I think that's incredibly important. And I really do think that right now we have to remember that we have a universal goal here of getting everybody through this crisis in a way that is great for our country, it's great for our economy, it's great for our organizations. But we have to recognize that what each cohort will need in order to get to that universal goal is going to be a little bit different right now. So we need policies that are not broad brush, one size fits all. We do need to think about whether or not working mothers need particular type of support right now versus, and that's not to say that working fathers aren't suffering, because the data shows absolutely that men are suffering with the crisis, Black employees are suffering with the crisis, working parents who are men are suffering. Like, everybody is hurting to a different degree and in varying ways. So we need to really think about nuanced strategies here that support the individual needs of particular cohorts, not broad brush, one size fits all.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on, but we only have limited time. So I'm going to close it here. I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been incredibly inspiring to get to listen to you speak and to have this conversation with you. On behalf of the Women's Tech Forum, I would like to thank the Digital Realty Women's Leadership Forum for their sponsorship and bringing both the Women's Tech Forum and Dr. Anita Sands to Marketplace Live for this conversation. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Dr. Sands, her work, you can go to her website, dranitasands.com, and get in contact with her there. Thank you so much. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Heading into the holiday season, have a great holiday as well.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Bye.